Okay, the footage you are watching comes from a short documentary most likely filmed in 70s. This is the Russian artist Nikolai Shurigan. For a period of time he was a teacher of my own master Alexei Antonov, who mentions him in his biography. In that sense, this man indirectly taught me the principles of layering painting, the very techniques I'm teaching today. Thank you, master. You can see he starts by drawing directly on the canvas with a pencil. Since the pencil marks will disappear during the first oiling of the painting, he then goes over the drawing with an ink pen. This is a perfectly usable method. Personally, I replace the pen with an acrylic marker when working on acrylic ground, or reinforce the drawing using oil paint and the brush. The contour needs to stay clearly visible so it doesn't get lost during the layering of the underpainting. The next stage is, of course, Imprimatura. A thin veil of paint, heavily diluted with turpentine, gently unifies the surface and controls its absorbency. More importantly, it establishes the lightest tonal key of the composition. After the Imprimatura has dried, which usually takes several days, Nikolai begins the umber underpainting. He gradually deepens the darks and models the volume of the forms, leaving the Imprimatura exposed in the lightest areas to preserve the highest values. I believe the footage was recorded over a longer period of time with breaks between stages since each layer needs time to dry. As you can see, he paints the table with a larger brush, covering and reshaping the structure he established earlier. In general, the umber underpainting is built in 2 layers, which naturally requires patience as each layer must dry before the next one can be applied. Now, he begins applying the first color layer directly over the umber underpainting. You can see that the paint is slightly lighter than the underpainting beneath it. This is exactly how it's done. The Imprimatura has compressed the overall value range, especially the highlights, and through layering, lighter values are gradually brought back into the painting. In areas hit by light, the color is about half a tone lighter than the underpainting. At the same time, you can clearly see that the halftones are noticeably cooler than the lit areas, which follows the fundamental rule of warm light and cool halftones. He then continues by painting the grapes and other fruits in shadow. In shadow areas, the paint is applied more transparently than in the light. This combination, thicker, more opaque paint in the light and thinner, more transparent layers in the shadow, helps model volume and creates a stronger sense of plasticity and three-dimensional form. Just as important, the underpainting is allowed to show through the shadow areas to a certain degree. Temperature is one of the key factors that gives shadows their depth. For red grapes, an umber underpainting is especially effective because the warm tone of the umber shining through optically increases the saturation of the colors applied on the top. Next comes the white drapery. Once again, you can clearly see what I was referring to earlier. The paint applied to the illuminated areas of the drapery is visibly lighter than the underpainting, while the halftones remain tonally close to it. The shadows, on the other hand, are painted slightly darker than the underpainting. In this way, the value range, initially compressed by the Imprimatura, is gradually expanded. As the layering progresses, more light and more color appear in the illuminated areas of the form, while deeper shadow and richer color develop in the shaded areas. The painter continues to model the form and introduces small details, reflected light, and surface texture already within the first color layer, which again suggests that the documentary was filmed over a longer period of time. Normally, the first color layer is primarily about establishing volume and form, while texture and reflected light are developed more fully in later layers. What we see here is the certain jumping between layers, which likely results from the slow, methodical nature of the process and the difficulty of documenting it within a limited time frame. Layered painting is precise, but also very time consuming. That's the price of perfection. Each layer can take several days to dry before you can paint over it. That's why it's a good idea to work on several paintings at the same time, so you don't end up just waiting for a layer to be ready for the next stage. At this point, the first color layer has already dried and Nikolai moves on to the second color layer, following the same principles. Lighter and more saturated color is applied in the light, while darker and richer color is placed in the shadows. The halftones remain largely untouched. The cooler tone established in the first layer are now balanced by warm, more saturated tones in the next layer. In practice, this means using one brush for the lights and another for the shadows, with a clean soft dry brush used in between for blending. This alternation is in fact the foundation of layered underpainting as well. One brush applies the paint, while a second dry brush gently blends the color right on the canvas. And this brings us to the conclusion of this demonstration. At this stage, he focuses on the finer details, surface texture and, above all, reflected light. What personally fascinates me is the speed at which he works. This is a highly detailed style of painting that demands a confident, steady hand. The reflected lights are placed decisively without unnecessary fuzzy blending, which clearly shows how fully the technique is under control. What really caught my attention is the way he paints glass. You can see confident, rapid brushstrokes that model the form directly over a dry surface. This is one effective way to paint glass, essentially resolving it at the end almost a la prima. Quite simply, it's truly a concert of skill. Yeah, Nikolai is really a master of his craft. Nikolai is most likely still a living artist and can be found on Instagram, for example. However, there is very little information about him available online. He appears to be a painter who has never been particularly interested in a modern self-promotion or maintaining a strong digital presence. Rather than building an online profile, he seems to belong to a generation of artists who live primarily for the work itself, focused on the studio, the process, and the craft, not on visibility or social media. At the end of the video, you can take a closer look at some of his paintings.
Ну вот и все.